This morning we're going to jump back into our series in the book of Luke. When I was growing up, I loved my childhood. I feel like I grew up in the best time to be a kid. And that's probably what a lot of people feel about their childhood. Not everybody, but that was like my look at the time that I grew up. I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, was kind of like my childhood period. In the late 80s, early 90s in Redneck, Michigan was awesome. Like you could ride your bike for miles and it wasn't a worry, no one cared. Your parents could just yell out the back door to tell you to come home from your friend's house, and somehow you could hear them. Like all those things were true, and I just loved it. And one of the things that I loved about my childhood, and it was a big deal for my family, were Disney movies. I feel like I grew up in the prime spot for Disney movies because from the ages of 8 to 11 years old, they released Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, and one other one I can't think of right now. But like these big ones, Little Mermaid, they released them like all in a row. And so they were releasing all these incredible movies, and it was such a big deal in our household that I can still remember where I was standing when I found out my mom bought the VHS of A Little Mermaid. Like these were big deals in my life, were these movies, these Disney movies. Yes, I liked The Little Mermaid. It's okay. It's all right. But one of the other things that made Disney movies great was The Vault. Do you guys remember The Vault? Yeah, like Disney had this deal that with all their classic movies, that they would only release them once a decade on the new technologies that came out, the anniversary year of when the movie was released. So with the classics, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, all of those old ones, you would get in these dead spots where if you didn't own the movie and Blockbuster didn't have it, you didn't get to watch the movie. They created this scarcity demand thing for us with The Vault. No YouTube, no Disney Plus, no like instant. It was like, man, you might be waiting a decade for the next time you watch this movie. My favorite of all the classics movies was Robin Hood. I loved Robin Hood. I wore that VHS tape out. Watched it again and again. Starting out with the rooster troubadour playing the guitar, telling the story. The weak Prince John Lion with his lisp and just patheticness. His little helper, Hiss, the snake. Little John, who was just Baloo from the Jungle Book with clothes on. Like they saved money on that by just reusing a character and just putting clothes on him somehow. And this story, like the story of Robin Hood was a common one, like we've seen it in a lot of different ways, of these people in power, the prince and Hiss and the people. And the way that they would use their power to oppress the people that were already struggling and take more and more and more from them. And my favorite villain, though, was the one I haven't mentioned, and it was the Sheriff of Nottingham. I loved to hate and loved the Sheriff of Nottingham. This is the Sheriff of Nottingham. Just look at that dude. The Sheriff of Nottingham was fun because he had this aw-shucks southern personality. Like he would like joyfully oppress people. Like he did it like smiling and trying to be positive towards him. His opening scene in the movie is he notices Friar Tuck going to help somebody, giving somebody who's got a broken leg money, and he sees him like, sweet, I'm going to follow him and take the money from that guy. And so in the first minute of him on screen, he takes money from someone with a broken leg. He finds out a kid at a birthday party and his present was 1 coin, and he taxes that and is like, we might as well start early, take his money, and then takes money from a beggar. The Sheriff of Nottingham comes on the screen with this like positive, like cheery demeanor, but he's like the wickedest dude there is because he's a collaborator with the powers that are oppressing the people. In the story, like Robin Hood and Little John and all the other people that helped him, like the way that they get back, right? The way that they get even and get justice is by playing basically the same game in reverse. Well, we'll just steal back from them and distribute it to people that way. And it makes for really good storytelling. But it's not the way that like we should engage the world. Like just to play the same game. The story we're going to look at in the Gospel of Luke this morning, the main antagonist in the story starts out like the Sheriff of Nottingham. This is who he is. And when he has an interaction with Jesus, Jesus doesn't interact with him by playing the same game, by trying to power over, by trying to like sneakily just take power from the dude and give it to people. The kingdom of God isn't about that. When Jesus interacts with this character, he's completely jumping in and pointing towards our big idea, which is this, is that God's love welcomes the unwelcomed. God's love welcomes the unwelcome, whether they be oppressed or the people that are enslaved by the way they're oppressing others. Jesus moves towards people with love and invitation and welcome, no matter where people are on the spectrum. This is the love that Jesus personifies all throughout the scriptures. That God's love welcomes the unwelcome. This morning, as we jump back into the book of Luke, we're going to be looking at the story of Zacchaeus. Now, for most of you in the room, when you heard me say that name, what's the first thing you thought of? The song. Zacchaeus was a wee little man. No, we're not going to sing it. BJ Burns told me I had to, and I said, nope, it's not happening. But the song really does a pretty good job telling this story. It tells us what happens, that he's this short guy that hides in a tree, and Jesus comes and he calls him down, and they go to Zacchaeus' house for a little party. And that's true. But I think the thing that we miss, and it's just because we're not in this culture, is that Zacchaeus isn't just like this guy in a suit that comes and asks for your money, like a tax collector we'd think of today. He's the sheriff of Nottingham. He's the guy that's oppressing all the people, that's collaborating with Rome to keep the people underneath. That's who Zacchaeus is. All tax collectors were considered conspirators with the Roman Empire. The Jewish people, the crowd, and even the disciples, to them, Zacchaeus was the enemy. He wasn't just some guy that they didn't like very much. He was their enemy. And it was such a big deal that even the rabbis said it was okay to lie to them. Like, keep the 10 Commandments, but with tax collectors, it's okay to lie to them because they're that wicked. God's love welcomes the unwelcome. We're jumping back into the book of Luke today, and this is our 85th message in the book of Luke. For the past 2.5 years, we've jumped in and out of the Gospel of Luke, and this is the 85th time we're doing that today. And it's been incredible to look at, little bit by little bit, what does it look like to follow Jesus? And learn that by looking at the way he lived. We're getting really close to the end of Jesus' pre-resurrection life. He and the disciples are journeying towards Jerusalem. There's only one section of Scripture between now and when he enters Jerusalem on a donkey, so like what we celebrate as Palm Sunday now, which is the start of his last week of life. So we're probably a week and a half-ish from Jesus dying on the cross. The intensity is ramping up. The crowds are getting bigger. His reputation is skyrocketing. Most people in these towns are hoping to not just have him come through, but host them in their homes because it would give their homes some credibility. When we were in this series last was at the end of August, and we looked at when Jesus came into Jericho, and on the way in there was a blind beggar by the side of the road who the crowd was trying to get to be quiet. The disciples were trying to get him to be quiet. But Jesus heard him crying out, healed him, and everyone rejoiced. So that's on the way into Jericho, just on the outskirts. And where we pick up in chapter 19, verse 1 this morning is right after that. So if you have a Bible and you want to follow along, 19, verse 1. Otherwise, the words will be up on the screens. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was so short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." So the way that Romans taxed, the way that they taxed the people in their empire was something called tax farming. And what they would do is in every city and region, they would set up one local person who was in charge of collecting all the money and getting it to the Roman official in the area. And so Zacchaeus is that guy. Jericho's a decent-sized town. He probably has a bunch of employees under him that are getting money for him too, but he's the main guy on the Jewish side collecting the taxes that will get to the Romans. And the way that this worked is that the Roman rulers and the Jewish chief tax collector would have a predetermined amount of taxes that he needed to bring in each year. But they were the only 2 people who knew that amount. The people didn't know the amount. And so it gave space for the tax collectors to come in and completely make up the number that the people actually had to give. Like they could ask for astronomically more money than was actually due and just skim the rest of it off the top for themselves. This is why these people were so hated. Historians estimate that without corruption, without any skimming off the top, the tax rate at this time was 50%. That's without corruption. So between the Roman taxes and the Jewish taxes, if you were a peasant living in these towns, an average person living in towns, 50% of what you brought in, whether that was money from business, whether that was crops, that was going to go back to the Romans and the Jewish leaders in a form of tax. So this is a huge burden, because if you're at 50%, automatically now you're getting skimmed off the top. You're giving away a majority of what you brought in just to keep Rome off your back. This is why the rabbis said it's okay to lie to them about how much you make. Zacchaeus, as this song and the scriptures tell us, was a really wee little man. He's a short dude. And the reason this comes into play in this story is because he was a short dude that was hated. If he was a short, wealthy, high-respected guy, the crowd would have been like, yeah, come up to the front. You can stand right here. You're an important person. We'll stand behind you. But there's no chance of that happening. They're not going to move for this guy. They can't stand it. And from Zacchaeus' point of view, he's really safe in places like the civic towers and where the other tax collectors hang out. But in a crowd of people in the first century who all hate you, you don't want really everyone behind you. You don't know who's got a knife. You don't know what's going to happen. So Zacchaeus' option is not to find a way to the front of the crowd. For some reason, though, he's dead set on seeing Jesus. This rabbi who lived in a way that these crowds are going out before cities to welcome him and just following him as he goes through cities, wanting him to stay in their towns. So he runs ahead of the crowd and climbs a tree. And these things are mentioned in this way because both of these things are considered massively shameful acts for a grown man to do in Jewish culture. Jewish men did not run in public. It meant they would have to hike up their robes a little bit. They didn't have like cool jogger pants. They had these robes, and that would get in the way of running. So you'd have to hike them up and you'd expose your legs and run. It was massively shameful. You didn't do it. And you didn't climb trees either. It was something kids do. Men don't climb trees. And this is true for me because gravity's strong and I don't want to fall. This is true of Zacchaeus because it was massive shame. This is true today. There's a guy named Ken Bailey who lived in the Middle East for about 30 years and wrote a commentary about like what Middle Eastern culture was like then and now. And there was I think it was an Israeli or a Palestinian leader who it was climbing a tree in his back fenced yard with his kids, and publicly it was found out that he did it, and he got shamed by everybody that he did it in his own backyard with his own kid. This is not something men do in the Middle East. So Zacchaeus, with this drive to see Jesus, just to get a glimpse of him, engages in two massively shameful acts, to get away from the people that don't like him, and to find a way to get a glimpse of who Jesus is. The fact that it's a sycamore tree means that it had to be grown outside the city. Sycamore trees had a deep root system. They get really wide. They weren't super tall, but they weren't allowed in the city because they would just overtake things. And so this is on the outskirts past the city limits. So Zacchaeus sees the way that Jesus is coming through the town and runs out past the city and finds a tree and climbs up in it, probably hoping that the crowds will disperse by the time Jesus gets there. But it also means that he's about 6 to 8 feet off the ground and not hidden very well. Yes, he'll be able to see Jesus, but everyone else will be able to see him too. If Jesus notices him, it's likely the crowd did too. Most commentators believe that the reason Jesus knows Zacchaeus' name is because the crowd was jeering him. That they saw him and were mocking him and calling him out and calling him names because he's unprotected right now. He's not back with all his Roman buddies. He's by himself in a tree. And so they're taking shots at him and telling him how wicked he is. And as Jesus approaches the scene, he sees what's happening, hears the name Zacchaeus, and calls out to him. And you see the crowd, the Jewish people, they would have expected a good rabbi to call Zacchaeus out. They would have expected him to stop and join in what they were doing. Ken Bailey says that it would have sounded something like this: Zacchaeus, you're a collaborator. You're an oppressor of these good people. You have drained the economic lifeblood of your people and given it to the imperialists. You have betrayed your country and your God. This community's hatred of you is fully justified. You must quit your job, repent, journey to Jerusalem for ceremonial purification, return to Jericho, and apply yourself to the keeping of the law. If you're willing to do these things, on my next trip to Jericho, I will enter your newly purified house and offer my congratulations. You're a scum. You're doing wicked things. I'm not coming anywhere near you. Here's the things you need to do to get right, and then maybe I'll come see you. That's what he would have been right to do according to the culture at the time. What the Jewish people expected out of their rabbi, this guy that might be their Messiah. But it's not what he does. Jesus tells Zacchaeus to immediately get down from the tree and then invites himself over to Zacchaeus' house. Inviting yourself over is a culturally weird thing to do in every culture. If I walk up to you in the lobby today and like, hey, my wife's out for brunch with somebody, my son's at a basketball game, I'm going to come over with my 3 girls and we're going to have lunch, okay? Some of you will be like, that's really cool because you're those people that like that. Most of the people will be like, no, you don't invite yourself over. Who is this guy? It was massively shameful in first century Israel because getting invited over was like the job of the host. Getting someone important into your house was the job of the host. You never would invite yourself over. Jesus does what's not expected by saying, get down out of the tree and I want to go to your house today. Jesus goes to Zacchaeus' house and he throws this huge party. But the people freak out. It says they start muttering and saying, he's going to the house of a sinner. And what they mean by this is that he's going to the house of somebody unclean. He's going into a house that if he goes into that house, he's going to have to go and be ceremonially purified before he can engage in Passover next week, because if he goes into that house and sleeps in that bed and sits at that table and eats a meal with him, he is now just as unclean as that wicked tax collector. Jesus, what are you doing? And on top of that, because this happens outside of town, this tree is outside of town. It says Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. The party and the banquet and the welcome that the people of Jericho most likely had prepared for Jesus, he had stiff-armed. And seems like he's just on his way to Jerusalem, sees this sinner and says, oh, actually, I'll go back into Jericho and go to his house instead. This is something that people didn't do. Zacchaeus recognizes his need. Whatever in him said, I need to get a glimpse of this rabbi, and show that he is willing to do like disgraceful things by running ahead of the crowd and climbing the tree. He's probably experiencing some sense of awe of this as a man, because the way things usually went, he'd be rejected. That's probably what he's expecting to happen. He just wants to get a glimpse from far away. Yet in Jesus, he finds acceptance. He finds his belonging with Jesus in this newfound security. And so Zacchaeus at this party stands up and says, Jesus, I vow to give away half of my wealth and to reparations to anyone I've stolen from 4 times what I've taken from them. If any of you have any math sense, that's not possible. It's not possible for him to give that much money back. In Middle Eastern culture, you would exaggerate to prove how truly you felt the thing, which means I might be really Middle Eastern. Because when it comes to numbers, I naturally exaggerate them and catch it all the time. But this was like a proof of, no, I'm so serious about this, I'm exaggerating to this level. He vows to live generously. The story ends with Jesus responding, today salvation has come to this house, because this man, too, is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. In this case, the lost was a powerful, wealthy man who after experiencing the love of God in Jesus, responds with reparations to those he cheated, and with Jesus naming him as part of the Jewish family. No, Zacchaeus isn't a collaborator. He's not part of Rome. He's part of us. He's a son of Abraham like all of us. His allegiance shifts from self-protection and being on the top of the ladder and trying to push everybody else down to being a child of Abraham, looking to benefit the community with the same love he's received. Jesus' interaction with Zacchaeus is an incredible example of what it looks like to respond to the love Jesus offers. We know more about how he responds to Jesus than almost anyone else in the New Testament. We don't know what happens with the Good Samaritan and the person that he took care of. We don't know if they remained being faithful after that, or what happened when the person woke up. We don't know. We don't know what the story of the prodigal son, that when the son came home, did he actually have a change of life, or was this just step one of get a good party and now go spend more? We don't know if the older brother, after being invited back in, actually went to the party. We don't know these things, but with Zacchaeus we know. Zacchaeus receives Jesus' love and then vows to live this generous life. It's a picture of transformation to action in a mere 10 verses. A beautiful example of what it means to receive and respond to God. And I think in this story, there's a lot for us to consider about what it looks like to follow Jesus today. The first thing is this, is that we are all Zacchaeus. We are all Zacchaeus. Ultimately, Zacchaeus is just playing a game of King of the Mountain. He's found his way on top, and all of us know when you play King of the Mountain, once you're on top, your goal is to keep everybody else down no matter what. No matter the act of violence it takes, the act of strategy it takes, the goal is to stay on top and keep everyone else down. It's this life that Zacchaeus has been living that leads to him having to climb a tree just to get a glimpse of who Jesus is. You and I all have areas of our life that are incongruent with the life that God has for us. There's areas of our lives that are just incongruent with what he has for us. Most likely, none of you are tax collectors. None of you are like Sheriff of Nottingham type people that are using your power and privilege to oppress people under you to keep yourself comfortable. If that is you, that's impressive. Good work in 2019, I guess, or 2020. Most likely, that's not your story. But every one of us here has struggles and insecurities, areas where selfishness masks itself as something good and causes us this distance and dissonance between us and God, ourselves and other people. And as we learn more about ourselves, as we get in touch with our shadow side, we realize that more often than not, we're willing to climb our own sycamore trees of shame and guilt. To live in the ways that are incongruent with God, sometimes because we really enjoy it, and sometimes because we don't know how to stop. But we climb these trees and look at Jesus from a distance because we don't want to be exposed. But we hope that from a distance something can happen. There's a seminary professor at Fuller in California named Hak Jun Lee, and he writes this. He says, "Guilt and shame do not move a person towards God. Rather, guilt and shame produce procrastination, fear, and paralysis. The power of divine grace is far stronger than the power of guilt. God's grace, though invisible, is transformative. It sets a new motion in our hearts. Once entered into our heart, it convicts and compels and convinces us away from the fear, anxiety, and shame towards the hope of reconciliation and a fresh start." This morning, every day, Jesus is looking up into the trees that you climb. Whether it's to hide from what you've done, whether it's a false mask of security to look strong. He's looking up the trees and he's saying, "Come down. Today I want to be invited into your life. Climb out of that tree rooted in greed and anger, the tree rooted in despair and hopelessness. Climb down from your pride and self-righteousness or your self-loathing and feelings of unworthiness. Climb down. I want nothing more to be in your life, in your actual real life that you're living." We are all Zacchaeus. And we're all invited to climb down and receive the forgiveness, love, and grace that Jesus has for us. We're all Zacchaeus. But we're also all the crowd. Once we climb out of the tree, we need to confront the truth that we are all the crowd. There's something basely human about us about creating internal narratives about who's in and who's out. Who's cool and who's not. Who's right and who's wrong. Who's the us and who's the them. Jesus, not him or her, thank you for reconciling me, but those people, they're too far gone, not them. They're way too far out there, Jesus. When we live life presently in the world we live in, we're going to interact with people that are difficult for us. We're going to interact with people that we don't like. Whether because they believe differently or vote differently or live differently or some cases create scenarios and systems of oppression that oppress us or others. One of my favorite authors said this. She said, "Following Jesus is a lifetime of trying to change the world and running straight into the truth that it's we ourselves who need to be saved." That following Jesus is this lifelong journey of trying to listen to his will and joining his way and coming up with all these shadow side moments of the way we view the world and the people around us and realizing, no, we still need to be saved ourselves. Saved from the way that we do this us and them stuff. Like, can you imagine if Jesus was physically in our world right now and he walked up to someone that was complicit and benefited from the oppression of other people? Like, we're watching it happen. There's someone we know is complicit and benefits from the oppression of other people. And Jesus ignores us and walks up to that person. Someone who's traded their integrity for political or social power or financial gain. Someone who seems dangerous to us. Someone who steals from people who are struggling in a socially approved way. What if Jesus walked up to someone who took the religious identity you hold dear and cherished and sold it out for their own benefit? What if Jesus was here and did that today? How would we respond? What if he walked up to somebody you hate? Now, most of you are probably like good Christian people who wouldn't verbally say you hate somebody. But somebody that when you think about them, that the feelings that rise up inside of you, the frustration and angst and anger. What if Jesus walked up to that person, a group of people, that causes that type of a reaction inside of you? If Jesus did it that, I'm pretty sure we'd react just like the crowd. We'd mutter things. Like, what is he thinking? Doesn't Jesus know the most important parts of the very law he came to fulfill? What is he doing? Jesus, don't you know we don't spend time with those kinds of people? We're often just like the crowd. When I think of this, I think of my now friend John. John and I were in high school together. I'm from a town, I graduated with 90 people, and it was the biggest in school history. It's like big time, right? John was a year older than me. He was in the youth group I was in, and I could not stand him. He was arrogant and cocky and mouthy. He did things to get people's attention. And when I turned about 22 and John and I were at the same college, I realized I hated John because he was the same as me. I was cocky, arrogant, and mouthy. I did things just to get people's attention. And once John and I got to know each other a little bit, we actually became really close. But for a long time, I hated John. Hated him. Could not understand how God was working in his life. Could not understand how this kid was in Bible college. But as I leaned in closer and started to see John for who he was, and I'm like, man, this is just revealing some of my own shadow side, and that's why I don't like this guy. But the crowd was strong on me when I saw God working in his life. No, not him, Jesus. Not him. Does someone come to mind for you? Is there a person who comes to mind that you're like, man, I struggle. I can't stand. I probably do hate that person. Is there a group of people that come to mind? All of us have these biases and prejudices that are naturally in us. We've built them from a lifelong journey through just living that we're all going to experience. No one's immune from that. But if we're going to receive the love that Jesus has for us, like Zacchaeus did, then the next move is when these biases and prejudices rise up within us, that we get curious about why. Why do I think that? Why do I respond that way? What's going on inside of me? With John, the only way my prejudice and bias went away is to get close, to actually get to know him. There's this article, it wasn't quite a book, it was a long article called Whistling Vivaldi. And it was about a African-American student at Columbia University, and like every other student at Columbia, white, black, every race you can imagine, they all wear hoodies all the time. But this guy noticed that when he walked down the street by himself, that people would cross the street and go to the other side automatically. And so he tried this experiment. He literally started whistling Vivaldi, classical music, as he's walking down the street. And he noticed that no one would cross over the street. What he was doing is noticing that these people have this natural prejudice that they probably don't even know they have. It's not like they're consciously going, oh, that person there seems unsafe to me because of these factors, therefore I'm going to cross the street and go over here. But there was something inside them that led them to feel that way, and without any chance of being curious about it, they just kept doing the same behavior. And when he engaged in something that kind of broke their categories for what they thought they were seeing, it disrupted it. All of us have these biases and prejudices for people, for what they think, what they look like, what they believe, how they vote, all these things. And I really believe the love of Jesus working in our lives causes us to look at these people that we call them, whether verbally, intentionally, or just notice accidentally, and say, what does it look like to move towards them with the same love Jesus moves towards me? Much like Zacchaeus, when we experience the love of Jesus, we get to respond to it by extending that love to others. Once we recognize that Jesus accepts us, invites himself into our lives if we are willing to receive him, then we know that invitation is for all people, and we get to respond animated and fueled by that love towards others. God's love welcomes the unwelcome. Whether you feel unwelcome because people have done that to you, they've treated you in a way that's put you where you feel like you're on the outside and maybe actually are on the outside, no, that's not how Jesus feels about you. There's nothing you can or will do that makes him unwelcome to you. Whether it's something you do to yourself, I have a personality type that assumes that I'm like the most wicked human being at all time and I'm completely unlovable. And in very tight social groups, I'm often convinced I'm one mistake away from them casting me aside, which is so far from the truth. But internally, that's how I think. And I bring that to God. He says, no. Come down from the tree. I want to be with you in your real life today. Climb down and experience the love of God and extend it to other people. If there's something that's pricked up inside of you that you feel like God is speaking to you this morning, chase after it. If not, here's some options for some action steps for this next week. The first one is this: spend some time with Jesus this week, confessing the areas of life that are out of step with him and receive his forgiveness. Remembering that when we come to Jesus, he doesn't come towards us with shame and guilt. He comes with love and grace and invitation. And secondly, identify a person or a group that are hard for you to love and take a step towards loving them like Jesus this week.